From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Pam Jackson. I'm the director of the Center for the Book, and we're here at the Library of Congress as part of the National and International Outreach Unit, and we welcome you here to this afternoon's book talk. We're very excited to share our passion and interest in promoting a culture of reading and literacy. And today's book talk and today's author and our partnership with the Research Reading Room that we have as a co-sponsor is really exciting for us. So thank you. I'll start just with a little bit about the Library of Congress, that, we are the nation's first cultural institution, and it's our mission to provide a very rich, diverse, and enduring source of knowledge. And we do so with a particular purpose, which is to have the nation and the world rely on our collections and the objects and the books and the music and the movies and everything that we have to stimulate and inspire intellectual creativity and productivity. And at the Center for the Book, which includes the Young Reader Center and the Poetry and Literature Center, we're focused on promoting books and libraries, reading and literacy, poetry and literature, for the purpose of engaging and supporting an informed society. We like to talk about being the defenders of democracy because we know that without literacy, democracies can't stand. And we like to do so fulfilling on partnerships with really exciting people and exciting books and exciting authors, which we have today. So as part of our mission, we have affiliates around the country. There's a Center for the Book in every state and the District of Columbia and the Virgin Islands. And we also have a network of partners, reading and literacy promotion nonprofit organizations around the region who partner with us and affiliate us with us in a variety of programs and initiatives. Finally, the Center for the Book is the administrator for the Library of Congress Literacy Awards program, where we offer prizes in excess of $200,000 to organizations to support and empower their literacy promotion work. And we do invite you today and those watching us at the webcast to visit us at read.gov/literacy awards to learn more about that program, because the applications are circulating now and that period closes at the end of March. But to focus on what we're here for, I mentioned that folks are watching online, so we are webcasting today's event, and we want to let you know that if you're interacting in the Q&A portion of our talk, that you are being recorded, and let you know that you'll become a part of the webcast. We also invite you at this time to just take a look and make sure that your mobile devices are turned on to silent or vibrating. And we also can remind you that, or let you know that read.gov is the place where you can find more than 250 talks and author experiences like this one that we're having today. Finally, as one last housekeeping, today's author is available for book signing, and the books are available on sale outside the door. So please make sure you take time to get your copy. This is a really remarkable set of works and information and presentation that I just am really moved and inspired by. So thank you. Now, the chief criterion for deciding about books and authors for the Books and Beyond series that is hosted by the Center for the Book is that we're focused on books that are authored about the Library of Congress, published by the Library of Congress, or sourced using the Library of Congress collections. We care deeply that the public know what kind of collections we have available, what kind of rich resources people can create as a result of spending time in our research and reading rooms, and we definitely have that to share with you today. So today's talk, I mentioned, is co-sponsored, and we have two: the Daniel A.P. Murray Association here at the Library of Congress, and also the Prints and Photographs Division of the Library of Congress are our co-sponsors for today's talk. And here to introduce the author is Beverly Brannon, who's the curator of photography in the library's Prints and Photographs Division. Now, her work in photojournalism began in 1974 when she was hired to catalog the Look magazine photo collection, over 5 million items, and she's co-curated Documenting America, an overview of the Farm Security Administration collection that includes more than 170,000 photographs documenting the Great Depression and America's entry into World War II. Beverly has written about the FSA photographs in both English and French. And in 1995, she co-curated the library exhibition Women Come to the Front, Journalists, Photographers, and Broadcasters During World War II. So Beverly, I'd just like to acknowledge you for your extraordinary personal scholarship and creation as here at the library and with your works, and to acknowledge you as a great partner to the Center for the Book and an extraordinary visionary in the work that we do in serving the public and promoting the library's collections. So if you would join us to introduce today's author, I'd thank you very much. And thank you for being here.
I feel honored. The library's documentation of racial issues in the United States is so vast that a single book can only suggest how extensive the record is. Dr. Speltz's book, North of Dixie, Civil Rights Photography Beyond the South, presents a selection of graphic images dating from the 1930s to the 1970s with a reference to 2014 to indicate that this is an ongoing situation in this country. This presentation acquaints a new generation and reminds an older one of this aspect of our past. Dr. Speltz's writings provide context for the images. A New York Times blurb for the cover of the book said that Dr. Speltz's work is needed because standard histories have focused on racial segregation in the South, as though it did not exist in other parts of the United States. Also, journalism at the time failed to represent that racism extended throughout the country, and that this book brings together some of the documentation of the pervasiveness of racism in the entire nation. Mark Speltz is an author and public historian who researches and writes about the civil rights era photography, vernacular architecture, and Wisconsin culture and history. He's worked for us as a senior historian at American Girl in Madison, Wisconsin for the past 17 years, and will be joining the Wells Fargo Family and Business History Center in San Francisco next month. This, his third book, North of Dixie, Civil Rights Photographs Beyond the South, was published by the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles in November 2016. His book credits some of the images to the Library of Congress, for which we are very pleased. So Dr. Speltz, please tell us more about your book.
Well, hello everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you, Pam, for that lovely introduction. Beverly, thank you so much for that and for all the work that you do in helping the Prints and Photographs collection be a resource for people like me. Thank you, Guy, and everybody on your team for making this event part of Black History Month. I'm really honored to be here, and it's so nice to see you in the crowd and a few familiar faces. Thank you for coming. I'm so excited to tell you about North of Dixie. I worked on it for truly 10 years, but in the last 4 or 5, it's almost consumed my life. So to be able to share something with people is a wonderful feeling. But I'm not going to read it to you. I'm not going to show you every photograph. I want you to pick it up and feel its weight and let your eyes linger over the photographs and take in the meaning and read the quotes. And I want you to think about civil rights photography a little bit different after today and after reading the book. So I'm going to share some of my favorite photos, tell a few stories about its development, highlight, of course, the Library of Congress images in the book and the connections and my research experience here. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions and a signing afterwards just outside of the door. So I've been deeply immersed in this world of civil rights photography for over a decade. And every conversation since then began with, why did you think about civil rights in the North only? Or why just north of Dixie? And it all started with these two photographs in 2007. I was a graduate student at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in a visual culture and photography class. And the assignment was, select a photograph and read it. Try to interpret it as a source. Tell us what stories it holds, who's in it, what we can learn from it. And I knew immediately I wanted to look at civil rights era photography. I've always been deeply moved by it, by the compelling images that I saw as a student growing up. So I went to the Wisconsin Historical Society and began to look at photographs from Little Rock, Arkansas, Daisy Bates's personal collection, snapshots from Freedom Summer, 1964, Mississippi, never been published before. And then I also, of course, saw photos like the one on the left that are truly iconic. From Jackson, Mississippi, a Woolworth sit-in, 1963. This one is used in history books, children's textbooks, documentaries, and it captures everything we know about civil rights era photography. It accentuates danger, violence, what the nonviolent activists faced, a sense of intimidation, but they raised awareness and generated sympathy for the movement, so they played an important role in the civil rights movement. The picture on the right, I looked at but had no idea how to interpret that. Sort of an urban scene, interracial group marching through, a police officer staring straight into the camera's eye. Well, 2007 was the 40th anniversary of when that photo was taken, and it was taken on the second night of 200 straight nights of marching for open housing in Milwaukee. So 200 straight nights would take you through a Wisconsin winter. I'd call that dedication. But I didn't know how to interpret that. I didn't know anything about the movement outside of the South, didn't know anything about it in Milwaukee, and I really had to begin to learn about it. And that's how this project began. My advisor said, people have written extensively about the one on the right. The one on the, on the left. The one on the right, not many people have looked at. Think about that. These were the types of photos I was familiar with. And when I say the word civil rights movement, they're the types of images that pop into your mind. Perhaps you've seen them yourself. They're used over and over again. They're downright famous and iconic, and they're important. They were important moments. They document important speeches, confrontations. So I knew I needed to understand how they came about, why they matter, who took them, and how they've influenced how we think of the civil rights movement today. The one on the bottom left, taken by Charles Moore for Life magazine, I had seen that. But what I didn't understand was the context behind the photo, what it documented, how it came to be. And Dr. King and the SCLC were hoping for photographs like this in Birmingham. They wanted to confront city leaders, City Commissioner Bull Connor, to overreact, to create a dramatic scene like this that could end up on the front page of the newspaper, international newspapers, the nightly news, and shock Americans, call attention to what was happening, put pressure on Birmingham to help begin desegregating the city. And it did help. But as I continued to learn about these iconic photographs, I found very few from the North and the West. And I knew that these images only told a part of the story. The most iconic pics are usually emphasizing Southern violence, the Southern movement, brutalized black bodies, charismatic male leaders. They overlook and make invisible the actions of ordinary Americans. So I came to understand what was being left out and that there was a need for a book like North of Dixie. North of Dixie is a small effort to shift this perspective, to recast the visual narrative. It's a visual exploration of the movement beyond the South, the best known individuals, and the most iconic locations. The goal of the book is to make visible lesser known but equally inspiring stories from LA to Harlem, from coast to coast. The selection of 100 photographs from the late 30s to the 70s capture the breadth of the movement and the diversity of issues that activists challenged in their communities. So everybody asks, how did you find all of the photographs, and how did you select them? Well, I began by searching for online galleries, working through the Library of Congress's website, going through every photograph book I could find from the movement. And then I began reaching out to photo archives, photographers, collections, and reading widely about the movement in cities like St. Louis, Chicago, Philadelphia, and Seattle. I visited the Chicago History Museum, worked with curators at the Schomburg at the New York Public Library in Harlem. And I went out to the Getty and looked at the top left photographer's collection, Charles Britton. Charles Britton was a core photographer with the Congress of Racial Equality in LA, among other things. And as you can see, those are contact sheets, and you can see markings in red grease pencils. And it allowed me to get inside of a photographer's collection rather than seeing the 3 most popular photographs that were published. So I was able to understand the ones he liked, where he would maybe crop something out. The papers, his personal papers, allowed me to see the ephemera, the pamphlets, the booklets. So how CORE used his photography, what newspapers published his works. So it was more than just an image or two. It was really understanding, providing a lens into how an activist photographer within an organization worked. In the end, I collaborated with photographers nationwide, some who worked in the North and the South, like Bob Edelman, who recently passed away. And he sent thousands of unpublished works from cities, about 15 different cities in the North where he worked. So I got to pick through those. And believe me, looking through 2,000 photos to find the 7 that I can use in a book is really difficult work. It's heartbreaking, actually. I was allowed to look through Gordon Parks' unpublished works with his foundation, the images from Life magazine from his essays, and selected 2 for the book. So that was a true joy. In the end, we included 50 different photographers out of 100 photographs, 50 different photographers. Not all art museum quality work. Some are photojournalists, activists, artists, and amateurs, and even police photographers. But, of course, my most favorite research trip of all was to here, the Prints and Photographs reading room at the Library of Congress. I was lucky to spend 2 full days, which is, of course, not enough, but 2 full days for a researcher is a lot of time. It's an incredible resource. So after scouring the website and the materials available from outside of the building and working with the archivists in advance to make sure I was going to have the most efficient research trip possible, I came and I began to hold those prints in my hand and flip them over and read the captions, find out whether or not they were used, who took them. Suddenly I had access to all of these lesser known, rarely published, if at all, images, the images we haven't seen before. I spent hours in the U.S. News and World Report magazine collection, the New York World, Tribune, and Sun newspaper morgue, and I was stunned to hold these contact sheets and pore over them looking for new stories, new angles, different insights. I also located crucial selections from the Library of Congress's NAACP visual materials collection. There are so many photographs that were collected, and I don't know how they came in, but there are snapshots that people took and then might have loaned to the NAACP. There were press photographs, studio photographs. Some had captions, some had nothing. But it's an incredible collection, and I can remember cranking through them on the microfilm, and it was the end of the day and my eyes were hurting so bad, and you press one more photocopy and you go home barely knowing what you have. And then the joy to see those photographs come in crystal clear. And I'll show a few on another slide. But this one is one that I found from 1942, and it's one of the earliest and the strongest photographs in the book. You can see what the St. Louis NAACP was concerned with. Stopping lynching, victory at home, and victory against racism at home, victory for democracy abroad, and then the more famous 1936 photo on the right. You can tell that racial violence nationwide was clearly an issue. These are among the strongest photos in the book, and I couldn't imagine North of Dixie without them. They expose the roots of the activism, and they're a treasure to have. But my favorite collection, and this was not planned at the Library of Congress, was the Look magazine collection. It's a true gem. How many people remember paging through Look magazine? Right, it's just like life, you know, large format, glossy pages, color photography. There was strong coverage of the Northern movement, perhaps most memorably of Selma. But Look also covered discrimination in the North. Once I found an article in the magazine or in the index, I would set that aside and know that there would be, 15, 20 photographs for each article that was never used, sometimes even more. But one of the best ones that I came across filled an entire page and a half in the magazine, and it was taken by Bob Edelman in the Brooklyn neighborhood of Bedford-Stuyvesant. And he said it captured for him what it was like to live in that neighborhood. And the whole article was what the different residents faced, whether it was in the schools or working nearby, paying high-priced rent, dilapidated housing. And the photograph was one of his favorites. And the funniest story he told me, I can still remember, sitting in my office talking to him on the phone, and he said, that photograph was stolen by the Russians, and it was printed in Pravda. I was just kind of write that down like another story that a photographer will tell. Well, sure enough, I was able to track it down in Pravda. Couldn't read anything on the page, couldn't tell you how I found it because it was word searching to get to it, and eventually found it. And I sent that to him, and he was so pleased to corroborate a story he's been telling all these years. And you have to remember, this is a point in American history where we were very concerned. We were wondering and worrying about what the Russians thought of us. So a picture like this was in stark contrast to what we were promoting as being the strongest democracy in the world. By now you're probably wondering, well, what are the differences between the photos in the North and the South? And, I'm embarrassed to say after 4 years of working on this, there really isn't. I was not able to come up with a really great definition of how they differ. I mean, sadly, they're the same kinds of photos. It's just how they were used. There was no shortage of dramatic confrontations, racist actions, or inspiring moments, speeches, and marches. The Northern media preferred to downplay and bury local concerns. They cast them aside in favor of covering heroic, nonviolent Southern protests. But when Northern movements and stories of local activism blew up and deserved to be on the front page, they could no longer be ignored. Photo editors had that same insatiable appetite to use violent, active, dramatic scenes on the front page. Yet when they covered them or wrote about them, there was never that same moral clarity when they were condemning the South. That sense of conviction was not there. So the photos and many of the stories were largely forgotten outside of the cities in which they happened. The Southern stories fit a comfortable storyline. They were easier to frame, point a finger. It was always easier to shift the blame. But seeing Northern photos of endless marches and burning crosses or kids in Chicago waving Confederate flags complicates how we remember the Civil Rights Movement. The North was not the racially benevolent place that our historical imagination suggests. It was not the Northern Promised Land that most hoped it would be. believe it's critically important to bring these northern stories into view. Dr. King often reminded people America's racial issue was not a sectional, but a national problem. Yet northern activism is absent in the way we characterize, teach, and remember the era. So if we want to understand the full story of one of the most important social movements of the 20th century, we can't just see half the story. Racism and discrimination were often more hidden and subtle in the North. There were not signs for separate drinking fountains, buses. Photographers had to work hard to make this discrimination visible. You had to march into a white Chicago neighborhood to call attention to the issue, like on the left. Or you had to lay down under a steam shovel in Cleveland to slow school constructions that would further segregation there. People struggled against pervasive forms of discrimination like housing segregation, redlining, racial steering, neighborhood boundaries protected by force. The top right photograph is from the Look magazine collection, and this family spent every Sunday touring the edges of Philadelphia where they could find housing. And this particular image shows them looking at a house that they fell in love with, but also realizing that it was in a whites-only section. The article was called Jim Crow Northern Style and ran in 1956. But one of the benefits of looking beyond the most well-known stories is we're better able to identify and appreciate lesser-known grassroots movements that were conceived of, built by, and waged locally by ordinary Americans. We see a woman here kneeling on her protest sign to block a dump truck at a construction site in Brooklyn that refused to hire black workers. We see activism and agency. We see men and women in San Francisco in 1955 picketing a cab company that wouldn't hire a single black driver. This is one of those photographs that I came across in the NAACP collection. And the photocopy I made was sort of rough looking. I had no idea how clear it would come through. And when it did, it was just gorgeous. I mean, you could see the details of the women holding the signs with their white gloves on, how well dressed they are, and you couldn't see any of that. This photo is so strong that it's been used in most of the press accounts, and it's probably the strongest image in the press pool, and I think it really stops people in their tracks. With these photographs, we see so much more than brutalized black bodies and violence. We see people making change, not waiting for it to come to them. That agency is important, and I think young people today can see that they weren't waiting for Dr. King to come to their city to lead the movement. They were there, ready to lead. Average citizens refused to wait, and they asked what they could do to make America better. We also see images of proud and determined youth, active, engaged citizens in the North. Both of these images come from the Library of Congress. The one on the left is from 1957 and went unpublished. Blacks were engaged in local politics, even working at the polls. This picture stands in stark contrast to the scene in the South where blacks were shut out of the political process. The image on the right depicts a successful sit-in, or as the typed caption notes at the top, a sit-down in an Oklahoma City drugstore. Most Americans are vaguely aware of the Southern sit-in movement that started in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1960. In fact, you can see a section of the lunch counter right here in D.C. and the stools. But few know about earlier sit-ins, such as 1942 Chicago, ones in Baltimore, Wichita, Kansas in 1958. And in fact, the 1958 Wichita ones are what inspired this group in Oklahoma City. Clara Luper was an NAACP leader there who led kids as young as 8 up to 16 into the desegregation over a period of about 4 or 5 years there. They did about 20 different places in Oklahoma City, yet very few people know that. So the stories and the views and so much more that are left out of that traditional narrative that we tell every February that we tell in grade school. There are more reasons to celebrate, more things to think about, harder questions to ask, and it's important to re-examine what we think we know. A lot of the pictures upend long-held assumptions about the movement and the turbulent era. Most popular accounts of the movement suggest that the struggle in the civil rights movement came north only when Dr. King came to Chicago in '66 to march to end the slums. The story then in those books continues that the movement floundered on the urban concrete amidst fire, rebellion, black power. That's the beginning and the ending of the movement in the North in a traditional story. But in reality, what historians have shown and what the photographs in North of Dixie illustrate is that the roots of the campaigns nationwide reach much further back, often before World War II. The top right picture is taken in Chicago, and it's a protest outside of a roller skating rink in an African-American neighborhood. The skating rink was called White City, and blacks were not allowed to skate there. So CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, which was founded there in about 1942, took up the cause and picketed every Saturday night. And they didn't make too much of a dent in business until they innovated and began to do stand-ins where they blocked the ticket booth on the busiest night of the week. And they were losing more and more business. But what really cracked the straw here and made a difference was they recruited volunteers that had military service. CORE recruited members to come out, hold signs that said the draft boards did not exclude Negroes, and wear their uniforms. And that began to make a big difference, because the individuals who fought for democracy abroad yet couldn't skate in their own backyard and were enduring a second-class citizenship, that made a huge difference, and they ultimately desegregated it within a series of months. Now the picture on the left shows how photography made issues that weren't always visible from the street visible. In this particular case, a member of the NAACP with his armband on is standing near a janitor or a resident pointing to the ceiling, to the huge plaster piece that had fallen. There's leaky pipes above that caused that to fall. And often these landed on men, women, and children who lived in the residences. And you would see them in the black newspapers wearing a big bandage with another story about this. Aren't you sick of falling plaster? We sure are, the headlines would say. Or they would say rats as big as cats, holes in the kitchens where rats could come and go. These conditions inside of the living residences, in dilapidated housing, overpriced by landlords preying on families that couldn't move out of the neighborhood. So these photographs made it visible. And I think that the pictures help challenge, for the average reader, the assumptions that demonstrations, riots, and rebellions, they didn't come out of nowhere. They didn't explode on their own. They were often decades in the making. And the issues stacking up, like unsafe housing, poor city services, unequal schools, overzealous policing, these are protests to inaction, complacency, and silence. So the escalating tactics through the decades, the more determined protests to call attention to the issues, look different when you see 20, 30 years of photographs of protests before a riot or a rebellion. One of the chapters focuses on activist photographers, and one of the earliest and best-known activist photographers is Danny Lyon, who took the photograph on the top left. He was a college kid from U of Chicago who brought his camera southern Illinois, I should say, Cairo, to a SNCC protest. On the poster on the far left, you can see Congressman John Lewis kneeling. Danny took this was his first protest photograph, first protest he went to. A group of high school age kids were protesting at a city pool that wouldn't let them swim there, African American kids. They were forced to often swim in the rivers, and every year or two that somebody would die, and this issue would boil up again. And SNCC had admired their bravery and strength. They had been beaten with pipes and arrested, and they were doing, I think, a hunger strike. And they went down to support. And this photograph tells that story, but it also captures SNCC's emerging sense of leadership. They were a youthful group. They had men and women. They weren't putting forth one charismatic male leader. So they used this photograph and this poster, as you can see the words at the bottom and their name, to advertise that. They also innovated by making it into a poster that they could sell, and they printed 10,000 copies at $1 a piece. So they began to use photography in a multitude of ways. And the activist photographer played important roles, but it also inspired other photographers, such as Bruce Hartford down on the left. He was involved in a group called NVAC, Nonviolent Action Committee, in Los Angeles. And the fuzzy little photo on the left captures their guerrilla tactics. What they would do is put on their placards, wear them around their neck, and in this case it says, "Don't buy Van de Kamp's bakery products." So they were protesting this baking company that was alleged for not hiring African Americans at their factories. And they would march into the grocery store singing freedom songs, throwing pamphlets out, and calling attention to the issue. And they would take all the baking goods off of the shelves and put them in those carts, and then push them up to the checkout counter and just walk out and create a stir. And then they would go to the next store and do a similar thing, and the next store. And of course, the police eventually caught up to them. So it wasn't the strongest tactic, but what he was trying to tell me is they would use these photographs on their brochures, as you can see the next image over. They were doing a sip-in at a coffee shop. He knew by watching SNCC and others that photography lent immediacy. It helped them dramatize the issues, and that's how they wanted to use it. He was not a professional photographer. He carried a little brownie camera that he had from when he was a kid and snapped these little pictures, but they knew that they helped. The other very powerful photograph comes from Detroit, from a massive collection of Detroit NAACP photographs at Wayne State University. Detroit's NAACP was the largest branch in the nation. They had a strong black middle class because of the auto industry and had more members than anywhere else. And they came up against school inequalities, textbook issues, hiring discrimination, and of course, police brutality. This picture was taken by the director or a volunteer and then sent to newspapers, black and white. It helped make a very invisible issue. And I say invisible because in Detroit, between 1956 and 1960, the Detroit NAACP investigated 150 different allegations of police brutality, and over 1/3 happened in the privacy of a precinct office, away from the public eye. They weren't recorded as they are now. So they used the camera to make that visible, to provide evidence of a beating. And of course, they sent it to the black and the white presses. And the black press would occasionally run a photo with the story, but the white press never covered the issue. The fourth and final chapter in North of Dixie is built around the concept of surveillance. And this is an issue that's not been written about much in relation to the civil rights movement. So I was very happy to be able to find some photos and cover it. The camera turned out to be an incredibly powerful weapon during the civil rights movement, as I've kind of showed and others have written about. But it was also turned around and used against the movement by law enforcement. You can look at beautiful civil rights marches and photographs and exhibitions, and once in a while along the way you'll see a police photographer in full uniform standing along a dusty road snapping pictures. And rarely do we stop and think about what or why they were doing. In this particular case, I found the gentleman on the top right in Cairo, Illinois. Illinois State Highway Patrol, documenting the marchers there. Oftentimes they were practical. You know, how many people are out? What are the routes that they took? How can we prepare in the future to better contain or control a protest? But more often than not, they were for surveillance. The top left photograph was taken in Seattle by a police photographer, but I didn't know that at first. I just saw a really great open housing protest. And when I went to the Seattle Municipal Archives website and looked at 24 of these photographs, I began to recognize a theme. People would kind of cover their face, or they'd put a peace sign up. And then there was, at the last of the images, one little brave 10-year-old boy who was sticking his tongue out at the photographer. And it hit me finally that they did not like that photographer. They didn't want to be photographed. And through the help of an incredible archivist there who kept digging for me, she found a document related to these photos sent by Sergeant Noble, who took them, delivered to the mayor of the whole city, detailing who was at the march, what their license plates were, how long it lasted, how many pictures they took, and all of that information. Others were much more secretive, like the Chicago Red Squad. There were Red Squads in most major metropolitan areas. But they would photograph and document and build surveillance files on anybody deemed against the state, protest groups, black power groups, communists, gangs. And what I found fascinating about it when I looked through their collections is there would be a number 1 next to somebody and their name on the back, which I've included one of those in the book. This massive collection was used against different groups. When CORE marched as part of the school boycott, reporters were tipped off in advance who was against this and that, and they were covering it. Police were able to arrest and use it against them. The contact sheets on the bottom left come from New York. The 3, I know you can't see them, the 3 are from Selma. A protest in New York related to the Selma marches and beatings. And the police were there just kind of documenting and monitoring who was there. The next ones over are from the Black Panther rally. And these ones really struck me because one photographer took 6 rolls of film of one Black Panther rally in one city related to one issue on one single day. So it gave me a feel for the size, the massive amount of surveillance imagery that was taken that exists out there. But it is hard to get your hands on. Most groups do not want to give it up. These collections, came about through lawsuits and are protected. But I think that it's an important way to understand that the camera was both a weapon for the movement and against it. And there's a lot to be learned, and it's very relevant today, of course. So my last slide, as you might imagine, working on a book during the past 2-3 years has been an incredibly powerful time. And with each issue, each tragic police killing, each college protest, it became more and more relevant, more and more timely. And with each photograph or gesture, coming up in the news, you're able to sort of harken back to an earlier time, to visual imagery you've seen before. And it became apparent with the cover that is incredibly powerful from 1967 in Newark, taken by the first black photographer for the New York Times. That it was powerful then, but then with the hands up gesture, it became even more relevant now. And the photographs that we see now, whether they come across our cell phones or actually printed in a newspaper, are going to harken back. They're in conversation. And then we begin to wonder which ones are going to be the images that will be iconic 50 years from now. Which images will tell the story? Which handful will be used to represent our time? One of the things I'd like to ponder on, and I'd love to hear kind of what the Library of Congress is doing with digital images that might be coming in, because it's a huge challenge. But there are efforts to preserve tweets, digital media from Ferguson, from Baltimore, and from St. Paul. But will we be able to find them 50 years from now if somebody wants to do a book? It's kind of a scary time. I worry about my own digital media. What will happen with the way we're preserving things now? But I do want to end with one quote in the preface that speaks to the time that we're in. And I think when the wonderful historian and photographer Deb Willis, who wrote the preface, sent it to us, I can still remember where I was when I read it and how moving it was. I don't know how she did it, how she picked it, but she chose words from James Baldwin, who wrote in 1961, "Bobby Kennedy recently made me the soul-stirring promise that one day, 30 years if I'm lucky, I can be president too. It never entered into this boy's mind that perhaps I don't wanna. What really exercises my mind is not this hypothetical day on which some other Negro first will become the first Negro president. What I'm really curious is just what kind of country will he be president of?" Thank you. Welcome any questions. And if you don't want to be recorded, I understand. There'll be plenty of time afterwards. Yes?
How did you approach viewing the surveillance photographs that you found? Did you decide to make requests of specific police departments or freedom of information laws?
Sure. In all honesty, I was searching for anything I could get my hands on. In Chicago, for example, in order to even view the Chicago Red Squad collection, you need to sign an affidavit, and then when you go, you can look through them. But in order to publish any of them, you needed permission of the person in the photograph, or if they've passed away, you need permission of their family. So I used 4 of them, and it took probably 2 months to get all those permissions, just myself. And of course, that was their verbal permission, and then the publisher reached out to them as well to confirm that in writing. But that was an incredible challenge. Other places, the New York City Municipal Archives, somehow they got that collection. Now the problem there was they were in the process of taking them from negatives and scanning them. And so they were just inching their way along through the years. And they said, well, they're not indexed in any way, they're by dates, so can you send us what you're interested in? And of course, at that point, I had to think, okay, what were the major protests or events that the police might have been paying attention to? So I kind of worked that out and then sent them that list, and then they went through and found whatever they could find. And I found a really nice archivist who digitized them and sent them to me, and then I asked a few questions here and there. But it's amazing what they have. In fact, one of them was around the 1964 Harlem riots. And they had a picture of the police officer who shot the young boy, which kind of started it all. They actually scanned and sent me pictures from the morgue of the young man. I mean, it was incredible stuff that exists. So there's a lot to be done with that angle still. And I was just doing the north, so anything from Mississippi, anything from the south where there was even more surveillance photography and, literally a government agency to track and disrupt. That would be a fascinating project, I'm sure. Not sure if it's going to be me, though. Beverly.
I'm thinking that I should tell a little bit about the way the library acquires digital photographs. I should say something about how the library acquires digital photographs. It's pretty difficult for us to do because we have to maintain standards that are higher than the commercial standards. So when people try to send us things, we have to go through a lot of gyrations to get it up to the level that we can put it on our website. We don't have a good delivery system in place yet for digital images. So we have worked with a few photographers who send us hard drives because none of the other commercial methods of sending things seems to work with the security systems that are in place here at the library. So they send us a hard drive, we download the images and send them back the hard drive, which sounds pretty clunky, and it is. We also work with photographers on the rights. They have to sign a form telling us exactly what rights they own, what rights they retain, and which ones they give to the public. And a lot of people are off-put by having to declare this. So that is an educational process we have to go through with each photographer. So we try to get multiple photographs, multiple digital photographs from individual photographers so that it's not going through this process with each person who sends a picture. So we're kind of in a slow, clunky mode of acquiring, but we do acquire digital images, and when possible we put them up on the website now, but a lot of people want to retain their rights so that the images are not available at present. And so we have to keep updating the digital images until such time as the people are willing to let us release them. So that's a little bit of background about how we acquire digital images.
Thank you for that. Incredibly complex, no doubt about it. Yeah.
What surprised you the most, and what are you going to be doing in San Francisco?
What surprised me the most, and it shouldn't have been a surprise, was that 97 of the photos were going to focus on ordinary Americans. That's usually one of my main points, besides the movement happened beyond the South, is who led and fought and did the daily work in the movement. And I think that that's also the most inspiring part. We don't need to wait around for anybody. Change begins with one. But I think that seeing that on the pages shouldn't have been surprising, but it was a really good reminder. Out in San Francisco, I'm going to be working with the Wells Fargo Family and Business History Center, so doing corporate history of the company and then working with families that are clients. Yes?
So obviously you've invested a lot of time and energy in this project, but I wondered if it has led you to another project similar or not?
Well, I do think about the surveillance photography a lot, and I always keep my eyes out for that. Any historian or author knows that you're always gathering material for the next projects. I'm also incredibly interested in the photography of Malcolm X. I spent a day in New York a couple weeks ago going through his 3,000 to 4,000 photos at the Schomburg Center. So some pictures taken by him during international travels, Nation of Islam photographs, things that he took during court cases with the Nation of Islam. So I think there's something to be done with that, but that's, a big project. And books are 3 to 4 years of your life. I don't brew beer or make cheese. I do history in my free time. Yeah.
I have a friend who was with the Attorney General for the United States in the 60s and was down in Louisiana and Mississippi doing voting rights activities. So I know there were some people on the federal level who were doing good stuff.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
wonder if there are archives related to that work, and if you have access to it.
Yeah. I didn't specifically come across them. I also wasn't looking. It's amazing, even though the book has 100 photographs, that's not a lot in a photography book. We had a binder about 3-4 inches thick, and when we got down to 150, cutting those last 50, 25, it's like, incredibly painful. And then when you cast that net so wide and you're working full time, you can only visit so many places, so you go to the best repositories that you know of. But that's not to say that you can sometimes get lucky. I worked with the National Archives and worked with an incredible archivist there. The Black Panthers were investigated in 1970 in a congressional investigation. And so they published a big, thick document book, detailing everything. And there were photographs in there as evidence. And I got really curious, well, where are those photographs now from the congressional hearings? And sure enough, somebody was able to turn them up at the National Archives. And they were photographs that somebody had taken locally, documenting where the free breakfast centers were, where the Panthers were located. There were some other things related to evidence of a bombing or somebody's car or something. And then there were press photographs that the investigation got from the local press and then used to identify everybody in it. There were police mugshots. So this archive was squirreled away somewhere. And it wasn't that the actual prints from the evidence that I was able to find. I was actually able to get them through the publication of the book. So they were the book files, which was just crazy. And you'd never think to look that way. So oftentimes, you might start on a search and then you get lucky finding it elsewhere. And if I had started out looking for the book publication files, they'd never exist. So, yeah. Great. Yeah.
So we'll have that be our last question, but I just want to say thanks again, Mark. Your presentation, your materials are vivid and striking and engaging. Very much appreciate your work, and I think that one of the things that I love about the opportunity to be here and share this with you all is that our hope is that it opens your minds and your hearts and makes us curious and want to learn more and make sure that our empathy is present and our history is known, and that we can be the kind of people who make that change, as you mentioned, versus wait for it. So thank you so much for being here and sharing with us. I'd also like to thank and acknowledge the Center for the Books Communication Director, Guy Molinaro, for coordinating today's event. Thank you again, Beverly Brannon, for your partnership with Prints and Photographs, and to acknowledge Daniel A.P. Murray Association for their co-sponsorship. Thank you all so much for being here, and take care.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.